All right, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Through His Eyes. I am Jay Gunner Ellsworth. I'll be hosting tonight. We should have some pretty good stuff to talk to you about this evening. Some very fun things that have popped up. Something I actually just saw a few minutes ago that I kind of want to include. I'll talk about it kind of towards the beginning of the show today. And we have a bunch of other things that we want to kind of go through and it should be a good show. First thing, I wanted to do some evaluation of the last show, just kind of talk about it. Even though only one person watched it, I think continually improving is something that I value and think is important. So, first thing is, last show was a little bit blurry. So this time I took the, you have a webcam. I actually took the plastic film off of the camera, and so now it's not as blurry. Who would have thought that? If you just take that little, when you open it, there's like that plastic film. Took it off. So, also, I think I want to go into more detail on certain things. I think that's valuable. Try to tell a little bit better of a story. I think on the Maduro thing I talked about yesterday, it wasn't very vivid. It was kind of boring. So kind of go down that way, be a little more confident. I'm going to do that. I think just presenting the message better. I think something that people forget is when you're talking about Christ, you have to be persuasive. You have to be, full of the Spirit. And that doesn't come when you're unconfident about it. When you have to be confident in your convictions, and I'm going to try to show that. Use less filler words, those kind of things, and kind of go that way. Something about me is I'm really good at improving at stuff, and not to toot my own horn, but I have a lot of most improved awards. In the old trophy case, what I would do is when I played high school sports, I played basketball and tennis, and what I would always do is I would come into the season and I barely make the team because I'm tall. Wasn't very good. And then throughout the season, I would be, and so I'd always win the most improved award. And so, we're losing the connection here, dropping frames. Oh, we're back. So anyway, I would always win those most improved awards because I got so much better. But it would have been better if I just practiced in the off season, not gotten so bad, and then I would have actually maybe improved past the point and been one of the best players. So anyway, but that's something that I can do. I'm going to get better. I'm going to get more confident. I'm going to get more in tune with the Spirit, a better talker, more persuasive, and you'll see that, I promise, throughout the shows. But anyway, let's get into today's show. A couple topics I want to talk about. I don't know if any of you have watched the Druski video. He's hilarious, by the way. One of the funniest people on earth, I think. He's a kind of this TikTok, Instagram guy, and he does these skits, but he did one about mega churches. So we'll get into that for a second. Second is... we'll talk about that. We'll talk about the housing crisis in America today, and obviously in other countries too. I'm most locked in on the America part of it. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about how it relates to immigration policy, how it relates to the old generation, the boomers. We'll talk about that and kind of the relation to mine and your generation, Gen Z. I'm a little bit on the older end of Gen Z, but don't call me a millennial. I'll be very angry. And then also kind of get a little bit more into immigration policy and something I like to call demonstrative cruelty, which I think is being practiced by the right to kind of tick off the left to rage bait them. So we'll talk about that. Before we get into that, real quick disclaimers. I'm not affiliated with any party, any religion. I don't represent any of their views. I don't, represent anything like that. So you don't take my words as the words of an organization, just my personal opinions. And then I also never condone violence of any sort. I want to make sure I say that. Even if I'm critical of a group or a person or a type of people, that's never an okay thing to be violent. So I want to make that very clear. And we'll get into that. Additionally, if you have any questions, I have 2 people watching right now. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. I can answer any questions about that. I'll usually answer them at the end. Additionally, if you can't think of it now, put it in the comments. I'll get to it the next show, which will be Monday. So first thing is that Druski video. So I watched that. Hilarious. But basically what he's doing is he is kind of making fun of the big mega churches. And if you aren't familiar with those, there are these churches and they're in these giant buildings and they have smoke machines and they come down on they're like hooked up with harnesses and they come down like from the ceiling and start preaching and, they're flying around and there's lights and super loud music. Anyway, it's like a whole show. And I do get, there's some benefit of that. You can feel the Spirit with loud music and with, gospel music, songs, things like that. You can feel that. However, Druski, this internet guy, was making fun of that. He was making fun of that whole situation they had going there. And his point was actually, I think it was very benevolent, is that if your church is like begging you for money, they need your money, and you can see the people who are the leaders of the organization are benefiting greatly from that. They're showing off, Rolexes and Gucci flip flops, and they have 2 private jets. That's probably a bad place to be. And also, I think something else that's important is if you think about Jesus Christ and you think about, would he come to this church? Would he watch? Would he go to this church? And if he was watching this, do you think he would be like cool with how they portray him and how they talk about him, with no reverence, begging for money, bad mouthing other churches? And so I liked that video. Obviously it was hilarious. I think it was funny. I don't think it was offensive at all. There's some people who are getting like offended by it. Boo, lame, take the joke. And so I liked it. I think it paints a good message, but I don't want to talk about that too much. I just thought that was funny. I saw it a couple hours ago. Next thing I want to talk about here is the housing crisis. Nobody knows this better than me. I'm a younger guy trying to buy a house, and I've been fortunate with money in the past, and I feel like I'm doing better than most folks. But it's still really hard to buy a house. Additionally, even my dad, he's had to move and is looking to buy a house as well, just because of his current situation. And it's even hard for him. He works as a lawyer. He's doing well. It's even hard for him. So it's crazy how bad the housing crisis is in America today. Houses are way too expensive. There's not enough. People like me can't afford it. And we're going to talk about why that is, because that's one of the most pressing situations in America today, because having a house, having a shelter, house, apartment, condo, whatever, is one of the most important things for human survival. We need protection from the elements. We want somewhere to call home, somewhere to put our stuff, somewhere to, build a family. And I think that having a house is very important. So we're going to get into that here. I'm a college graduate. I graduated in global supply chain management, which is business. It's the flow of business. I don't want to get nerd out on that, but I also took Econ 110, which is a notably hard class at my college, and I got an A-. So I feel qualified to talk about economics and business. And here's how you can solve the housing crisis. There's 3 ways. First of all, you need less people in America. So we need to either have less people, drastically less people. We need more houses, or we need people who have multiple houses to sell the second one. So, and obviously, I don't think we should be able to force people to sell their house. So we'll kind of push off that third option. But those are kind of the 2 ways to do it, because the law of supply and demand states that as there is more need for something, you can increase the price. So, for example, if you're a realtor and you have 10 people looking to buy your house because there's not very many, and you have 1 house to sell, as a realtor, you're going to just give it to whoever pays the most. And so it's a bidding war, and the price rises and rises and rises and rises. And that's why houses are so expensive, because there's not enough. And so if there were more houses, if instead it was the realtor has 1 buyer, but has 10 houses, now this buyer has all the power to decide how he wants to spend his money. And the realtor is like basically begging this buyer, because he wants to make his commission. He's begging this buyer to buy a house, and how he convinces him is he makes it cheaper, makes it a better deal. And so really the biggest solve for this is just to build more houses. And in America, we have so much space. There was like this whole thing. I feel like when I was growing up in elementary school, they like really clamped down on overpopulation. They were scared of overpopulation. That is so not a problem. If you still are scared of overpopulation, maybe you either live in New Delhi or Beijing, or you're just misguided. We have so much space in America and in the world to put houses with lots of land if you want, apartment buildings. There's tons of space. The problem is we can't build them. And there's a few reasons for that. First of all, there is a decline in the labor force in terms of like blue collar labor, construction, things like that. Additionally, there are problems with too many regulations. The government, it makes it so hard to do anything. And I would know this. I recently am starting a business, my own business with 2 of my friends. We're called Eradicare Pest Control. So if you ever need your bugs taken care of, let me know. We'll make that the sponsor of the video going forward. But it's really hard. It's been like months to just start a tiny little pest control company. It's taken us months of permits and charters and licenses and tests, and it's just miserable. And housing's the same way. It's so hard to build a house. And the more liberal and developed the state, the harder it is to build the house. And I do get, you don't want the houses like falling down or catching on fire really easily or anything like that. But you got to be able to build them. It can't be so hard to build them that people just give up and just don't care. And so we've got to, the solution is we got to build more houses. The other way that we would solve this problem is we have less people. And I'm in favor of big families, lots of children. So I don't really like that solution. However, one side of the aisle would posit that because we have 30 million illegal immigrants in our country, that if we got rid of, because they're in houses, and some of them obviously there's seven or eight people to a house, 3 families to a house, 2 families to an apartment. They're not living they're living cramped. So it's not like it's like crazy. But 30 million people leaving the country, that would be a large benefit for the housing crisis, because there would just be so many more houses. And then there's the other side of that where they say, well, there are a lot of the construction workers, but the only reason there are a lot of the construction workers is because the construction managers and companies can pay them way less to do the same work that a citizen would do, because there's no protections for them, because they could just be deported at any moment. And so they would say, oh, well, it's cheaper labor. It's going to be easier to build the houses. But actually, I don't want my house built by an underpaid, basically slave, right? I don't want my house built by someone who they're only paying them enough to live 3 families to an apartment. And if we could fix the supply and demand issue, the increased labor cost would more than balance that out. Just based on, the history of our country, how things have gone, you would think that, okay, we didn't have a lot of illegal immigrants back in the day when houses were cheap. We have a ton now. By the logic of that, houses would be cheaper, right? We have 30 million workers. Why are houses more expensive? So you have to just think of that from both sides. Obviously labor costs would increase, but the supply and demand would more than drive the cost down. Another caveat to this is we do have a big problem in America with large conglomerates, large corporations. BlackRock is kind of the biggest one, the trigger word, buying single family homes and then jacking the prices up. And so one thing about the law of supply and demand is it has to be fair. You can't have monopolies. You can't have one corporation who can influence the market by themselves. That makes capitalism not work. And so we can't have BlackRock inflating the prices of houses artificially to make more money, to return more on their investment. And so that's another kind of side piece to this is, on top of the supply and demand issue, we have to eliminate BlackRock from buying single family homes. And actually, that's a pretty widely accepted policy on both sides of the aisle. You have the hyper capitalists who just say, well, just let them do whatever they want. But it doesn't work if it's not fair. And another big proponent of this is the government. The government gets free money every year. They get taxes every year. When you don't earn the money, you don't really care as much how it's spent. And obviously we elect people to spend the money appropriately. There's caucuses, there's groups, Congress has to approve budgets. There was a government shutdown that we had because of, the spending. They didn't believe it was spent appropriately. But the overall factor is the government also affects capitalism because they have so much money, trillions of dollars coming in. They get to decide how to spend it. And that is a huge change in the market. And the point of that is to create social programs so that the underprivileged people, the people who aren't benefiting from capitalism, can kind of have a standard of living and not just be, totally poor. And I think I support that. I think a lot of people support that. We've got to help people. Jesus would support that, right? He said, give to your neighbor, love your neighbor, even if they're underprivileged, even if they despitefully use and persecute you, you're supposed to pray for them and help them. And so like programs like SNAP, things like that, those are beneficial. Those are good things. And I see a lot of Christians who are anti those things, and I understand we need people to take accountability, try to get off these programs, but it's okay when you're down on your luck to get a little bit of assistance. And I would posit maybe we should be giving them food directly instead of money to buy food. That just, I mean, I get that complicates things, but sometimes those SNAP funds are wasted, used misappropriately. They buy soda, which I love soda, but that's probably not. I mean, if you're so broke that you can't afford food, I don't know if you should be buying, Twinkies and Oreos and soda. So anyway, that's another topic for another day. But anyway, sorry, it was kind of a tangent that I just went down there. Let's see here. Where was I? Also, I'm not reading off a script. I just have like a few notes just to keep me on track so I don't just delve into nothingness. Oh, another thing. I talked a little bit about buyer power. This is another principle. There's a balance in all business and in all economics between buyer and supplier power. Basically, when you go into a negotiation, one side is going to usually, sometimes there's even negotiations. One side is usually going to have more power than the other side, just going in. And 99% of the time, that person wins. That's why America can boss everybody around in the world. Because we go into like they say, Trump is a great negotiator. We go into it with all the power, all the cards. And so the fact that we've been losing these negotiations before Trump, I mean, they must have been terrible negotiators. You literally have everything on your side and you're losing. That's crazy to me. There's something called a BATNA. It's your best. Oh my goodness. I graduated like 2 months ago. I can't even remember basic vocab. Best alternative to a negotiated agreement, which is basically like, if you can't reach an agreement with this person in this negotiation, what is the best thing that could happen? So for example, if you're buying a house and you got 7 houses that want you to buy them, your best alternative to a negotiated agreement is you buy one of the other houses if it's not the right price. And so you keep shopping around, going to other houses until you find the one that's the best value. However, so I kind of talked about this earlier, but if you're the seller, if you're the realtor trying to sell your house and you have 10 houses that you're trying to sell and only one customer, you have no BATNA. Your BATNA is you lose your commission. But if it's vice versa, sorry, this is getting a little confusing, but if you have one house and 10 buyers, which is how it is in America right now, your BATNA to this deal not going through is you find another buyer with more money. Someone who got a bunch of money from their parents or got really lucky or made it really good in business. The current situation is the seller has all the power. We need to switch it so the buyer has the power, because then the working man, the consumer, is going to be able to drive those costs down by competition. So anyway, I talked about that. Just keep in mind buyer and supplier power. They say this housing thing is a government problem. It is an economics problem. And the government is going to have to artificially stimulate those economics to happen, but it is a problem solved by economics. And many of the problems of today with affordability are that. Gas prices, grocery prices, they're economics problems. Okay, anyway, sorry. Let's see here. Oh, the other thing is boomers. So a lot of the reason why we can't drive home prices down is because boomers don't want prices to go down, because a lot of people, their only investment is their house. In Bellevue, Washington, you bought a house 25 years ago for $300,000. It's worth $1.1 million now. You don't want it to go back down in price. You made all this money. Your house is worth 4 times what you paid for it. So these boomers, 50, even Gen Xers, honestly, like anyone who's like 50 to 70 right now, 45 to 70 right now, I mean, they just nailed it because housing prices are so high, and they are actually appreciating that. But what they've got to recognize is they're killing their kids and their grandkids. They're just, the holding on so tightly to having a high value house, you're just obliterating the next generation. And so I'm sorry, boomer, your house that was $1.1 million is probably going to have to be $800,000 now. You only made 3 times your money instead of 4 times your money. Can you live with that? Not to be disrespectful, but like, can we do some giving? Can we help others? I mean, with one salary, your wife stayed at home. You had 6 kids. You were able to afford this giant mansion. Like, and your grandson or son or daughter can't afford a 1 bedroom or a studio apartment, and they can't afford a house, so they have to rent forever, and rent keeps going up. Like, let's have a little bit of grace for the people who are coming after us. You benefited from the people before you, but now you're just holding on tight. And the other thing is, people, they say, these people, they say, well, my inheritance, I'm going to give so much money to my kids in their inheritance. You're going to live to 95, dude and madam. Your kids will be like 70. If they need an inheritance when they're 70, they have failed. I'm sorry. It might be a little bit of gravy for them. They can go on a cruise, or they can buy a second house or a vacation home. They need the money now. They don't they don't need an inheritance in 40 years. They need your help now to get started. And so I just be careful. The story. It's harder for a rich man to get into heaven than for a camel to go through the eye of the needle. Um, and the eye, that's actually a lot misquoted a lot, because they think of like an eye of a needle, like a little needle that you sew. Eye of the needle is actually a rock formation that people had to pass through when making journeys. And so the camels had to go through this rock formation. They have to get on their knees, and it was really hard. Anyway, it's a whole thing. It's a story. However, so that what that shows to us is it's actually not impossible for a rich man to go to heaven. It's not impossible, but it's a lot harder. And so I think, and I don't want to give you, like I said, I'm not giving you any like professional advice, but this is my plan. I do want to make a lot of money. I want to be wealthy someday in my life. And what the plan is once I retire, whenever that is, at 65, whatever, 70, I plan to retire, and then you have your investments, you have everything set up. You're not planning on earning any more income, except for maybe investment income, passive income. You factor all that in, and you set yourself a budget. This is how much money I can spend every month, and when I die, the remaining balance of my net worth will be zero. Planning to live to maybe 100 or whatever, 95. You never know what technology can do, maybe 105, whatever. Either way, you set a budget and you say, okay, I can spend this much money each month, including my investments. You can do all that with math. I'm pretty sure ChatGPT can do it for you. And you say, okay, when I die, I'm going to have $0 left. Or when me and my wife die, we're going to have $0 left. And then you live for fun, and you give the money to your kids, and you give it to, to the poor. You help other people. You use what you've accrued in life to like help people. You don't just don't hoard it. And, if anyone who knows me is watching this, they'll know I'm super frugal. But the plan is to be frugal now so I can be frivolous later. While I'm still earning, and while I can barely make, payments and rent, things like that. The plan is to be frugal now so I can be frivolous later. And I would say to the boomers whose house has gone up 4 times, maybe do a little downgrade. You probably can't even make it up the stairs. Your sciatica, you're taking Wegovy for your sciatica, and you can't make it up the stairs. Like, maybe buy a 1-story house, on less land in a 55+ community. Play pickleball with your wife, have fun. Maybe sell your second and your third home. Take all that money, invest it in the S&P or in a dividend stock, and then now you have $60,000 a month to spend till you die. Or maybe it's less than that, $10,000 a month. You know what you can do with $10,000 a month? I mean, first of all, you could eat at Ruth's Chris every night for dinner, but hopefully you'll want to do something a little more noble than that. But anyway, sorry, and I'm not trying to make fun of people with sciatica. That just popped into my brain, because you probably can't go up the stairs to the 4th story of your mansion. Anyway, but yeah, live like that. Live frivolously. Give to especially to the people who you love, your kids. Especially, your wife. Buy her a nice necklace. Your kids, your spouse, your family, your close friends who maybe have become like family because you've spent so much time with them. Let's be generous to these people who have made our lives perfect, made our lives, so good. And give to maybe the religious organization that you're a part of. And, there's so much you can do. And I just promise you, your life is going to be happier if you just do it. And I get it. I know exactly how it is. That money was earned with blood, sweat, and tears. I've had jobs where it was a grind. It was a fight to earn those dollars. And, you don't want to give it up because it means a lot to you. And this is something I've personally experienced. But I promise, if you just let go, and it's hard, just let go, it's going to be so much better. Your kids will love you more. I mean, you can't buy love, but if they see you like giving and being free with it and building a relationship. You go out and you fly and you see them 4 or 5 times a year, 6 times a year. See them more often. So just like that kind of stuff. That's just my advice that I would give to our older community, because there, and I hate to say it, there is a lot of, the whole okay boomer thing. There's a lot of suppressed anger and frustration but from the younger generation to the older generations, and it's coming out and it's bubbling over. And I think if you're the older generation, I think that you need to try and stifle that in any way that you can. And it's not like a threat. I'm just giving advice, because when you die, you don't take any of that with you. All you take is the relationships that you've built. And I would just try to foster those, and spare no expense in fostering those relationships when you get up to that age, and do that. And so that's something that, and I am preaching from, I'm talking from a point of, from a position of, I am failing at that. I'm telling you, but I'm also telling myself, like, all right, like, let's be a little bit more free. Let's try to, have fun in the now, in the moment, and not just hold on so tight to what we've made. So anyway, that is good. Housing crisis, talked about the boomers. Spend your money, and if you've spent your money on your kids and you accidentally spent too much and now you're 96 and you have another year of life left, just miserable year of life, that'd be just the worst. But if you have that, I promise your kids are going to take care of you. You could say, hey, sorry, I budgeted wrong. Can I live in your basement? And they'll be like, yes, thank you for taking us on 9 cruises. Yes, you can live in our basement for your final year of life. Or yes, we'll front your hospice care. Anyway, so that's my advice that I need to take myself. We'll just say that. Great. All right. Well, we'll talk about immigration. I kind of wanted to talk about protesting, because there's a lot of protesting going on, especially in relation to immigration. So we'll call that, we'll kind of do that a part 2. We'll get to that. Maybe I'll preface it a little bit, but we'll get to that on Monday more, because it is Martin Luther King Jr. Day on Monday. So that's awesome. We can celebrate that by talking about protesting and what they used to be, what they are now. But for now, I do want to talk a little bit about immigration. It's one of the hot topics, one of the buzzwords in America today. And I kind of talked about how it relates to housing. If we cut the population in America by 9%, there would be so many free open houses that it would be easier for people to get into homes, drive costs down. But I don't know. Like I said before, I don't know if necessarily that's the best way to fix it. That is one option. But a lot of immigrants do a lot of good. But also, if you're here illegally, no one's above the law. You have to keep the laws. And people will say, well, Jesus rebelled against the Pharisees. Well, that wasn't the law of the land. That was a religion that Jesus knew perfectly and fulfilled when he came to the earth. And so it literally is prophesied that he would fulfill the law. They just didn't think he was the one who was going to fulfill it. And so when people say, like, well, Jesus was kind of a rebel and kind of a hippie, and he broke the laws and he did his own thing, did it his own way, that is true, but he was fulfilling. Well, actually, it's not true. He fulfilled the law, and so he didn't need to follow those anymore. And until that law is changed in America, where people can come in whenever they want, no one's above that, unfortunately. And I get, like, and I want to be nice to everyone and love my neighbor. And there's the story of the Good Samaritan, where you help people even if they don't look like you or act like you or have a different culture. But unfortunately, you can't just go around breaking the law. It just doesn't work. Everything falls apart if you don't keep the rules. And so we've got to either find a way to make these people naturalized citizens, or they've got to go back to their country. And I say that out of, love, but that's just how it has to be. What I am not a fan of is how it's being handled right now. And the first reason why is they're barely deporting anyone. It's like the numbers would astound you if you saw the actual numbers. They have like these studies, and I've looked at the studies. They're terrible. 2 million people have self-deported. Nonsense. The study doesn't hold up against anything. And I don't want to read that because it's boring, but if you look for yourself at the study of the 2 million self-deportees, it's just a terrible study. And I took a lot of statistics class, I wouldn't know. The number is probably more like 300,000 people have been deported since the start of this administration. That is, I mean, that sounds like a big number. That's like not very many at all. It's very, very few. But what they do is they make a big show of every deportation. They post on TikTok these videos of them tackling an illegal immigrant, putting them in handcuffs, and you're going to Guantanamo Bay. They do that performative, that provocative way of looking at it. And again, like I talked about last week, they're literally rage baiting you. And the reason they can do that is because they have a base who wants to see that, who have kind of, their heart is blackened a little bit. And it's I don't want to say rightfully so, but it's in response to the craziness on the other side of the aisle. We have people on the right side of the Republican Party who their heart is a little bit hardened. It's a little bit blackened to humankind, to human life, to to autonomy. And when they see that taken away, they're like, I voted for this. Like, yes, that's what I want. And what the Republicans know is they can win with just their base, right? I mean, everyone on the right side or the left side hated Donald Trump. He still won in a blowout, in a landslide victory this last election. And when you recognize that all they care about is getting elected, that's their only motivation, you can recognize that they care more about making their base happy than about pissing you off. And so they will do anything to have people who voted say, wow, I like what they're doing. I'm going to vote for them again. What they don't want is to lose those voters. And so they do this. It's called performative cruelty. They're like way crueler and like, oh, we're deporting everybody. Nobody's safe. We're going to schools and taking children. And, we're running people over. And anyway, it's a whole thing. They're really not deporting that many people. You're just way more mad about it. Obama, how he did it is he just deported people quietly. You just didn't really hear about it. I was alive during the whole Obama thing, and I never really, they literally had people in cages. They were deporting everybody, hundreds and thousands of people, and you just didn't even know. And what Trump could do, if he didn't care, if his only thing wasn't about getting his people reelected and doing his legacy like we talked about last time, is he would just quietly deport a lot of people, right? He wouldn't do the whole performative cruelty. He would be more peaceful about it. They might have to arrest some people. There might be some struggles because, sometimes people don't want to leave. America's great. But they could do it in a different way, and it would not be such an issue. You wouldn't have so many protesters. There wouldn't be so many human rights violations. There's people getting shot. It's just like that could all be avoided if the law, because when you deport people, you're enforcing the law. You just have to do it in a respectful way. And that's going to be a much more successful way to go about it. Anyway, they're being way more cruel than they're deporting, and I hope that my people on both sides can see to the base who wanted deportations and to the other people who don't want it. They're literally like playing both of you like a fiddle. So just keep that in mind. And I'm sure there are reasons for that. I'm sure there's people higher up. Not to conspiracy out. There's people higher up who want this contention. But let's try and end it, right? Let's focus on things that'll bring us peace. And, I would say Jesus Christ is the one who brings me peace. And the one who lets me see, like, I think empathy is important. You see both sides. I get, if I was a staunch Democrat, I would be pissed off too. But I'd probably be protesting. And if I was a Republican, I would be so mad at the left that when I see, Trump purposely doing things to make them angry, that would make me happy. And that's because there's such a divide. And I hope what I'm trying to do is bring it back together. And, with my one viewer, I don't know if that's going to be something that happens, but I think that it's worth it to try and to get better at this whole talking about it thing. Anyway, let's see. So I'm gonna tell you the solution. This is what I think Christ would do to solve the immigration issue in America. You can't have people lawlessly invading a country, especially when the cultures are so different. That it's like night and day. And that's not to say one's better or worse, but that's to say, like, when there's that mesh, when those two cultures butt heads and it wasn't prepared for, it's not done in wisdom and order, as they say in the scriptures, you have so much struggle. And you have people, not really fitting in, and it leads to contention. And so obviously that's not something that can happen. The other thing that can happen is, if you try to come across the border, then, we shoot you. So we can't have that either. Those are the two extremes. We can't have either one of those. what I think the real solution is, I would call it widespread, peaceful Christian pseudo colonization. So that's kind of a mouthful of words. But you think of like the Crusades of the Catholic Church, where they would go into these places, they would impart their culture and their religion. And that was how they did it was bad, because they just basically said, if you don't accept this, we're going to kill you. And so that, that's not the way to do it. But it's basically a widespread missionary effort. But on top of preaching religion, you also preach the culture of America and of, the Western civilization. And there's a little bit of this going on. Well, there's actually quite a bit of this going on in the world today, but that's got to be increased. And not only the culture and the religion, but also the technology. Something interesting that I learned in my global supply chain class is actually the biggest reason why Africa is still struggling. People are starving and not having enough drinking water. The biggest reason is actually a lack of infrastructure, of roads. There's water. There's plenty of water. There's plenty of food. They just can't get it there fast enough. If they had, I-5 and I-15 roads like that, and they had cars to get in places, it wouldn't be an issue. They would just be able to take the food from where it is to where it needs to go before it's spoiled, and, get the water there. Water's heavy. It can be hard to transport. They just don't have the infrastructure to do it. And so these countries would be so much better off if we could just give them the technology. I think an example of is North Sentinel Island. I don't know if any of you know North Sentinel Island, but it's an island. I think it's kind of by India. I should have researched the geography. Anyway, it's a small island, and the people have basically no contact with the rest of civilization. And people say, well, we need to preserve that. We need to preserve their culture and their way of life and things like that. I just think that's nonsense. I think that's actually cruel to do that. You have these people on this little island, and half the women die during their pregnancies. They poop in holes in the ground, and they're all starving. They have to fish is the only way they can get food. We want to preserve the culture and the way of life. The way of life is horrible. It's torturous. And I get that, they kill intruders. Let's have some benevolence and say, hey, they probably just are scared. Let's help them out. And I know there's actually some trade going on with India and stuff, but let's get them a toilet. Let's get them some good food. Drop some Big Macs down there or something. And let's get them some hospital, maybe not a hospital, but just like a tent with maybe epidurals and medical staff on standby, someone to maybe perform C-sections. Let's improve their quality of life, because something you'll learn, and this is coming from the perspective of a avid missionary, Christian missionary, try to be a missionary in my own life. People can't accept the gospel until they first have their basic needs met. We have the hierarchy of needs, right? They have to have a place to live. They can't be starving to death. They can't be dehydrated to death, right? We've got to cover those basic needs, and then religion will improve their life drastically. But people, it's hard to think about that when you can't eat. And so that's why, you see the story of Jesus when he's preaching to the 5,000 people, and there's the loaves and the fishes. He feeds them, right? And you think, well, he's a missionary. He's a prophet, a preacher. Why is he focusing on feeding people? He should just be focusing on feeding them the word of God. That's all they need. But no, countless times Jesus is talked about eating. We see him eating fish on the shore of Galilee with the fishermen. We see him having the Last Supper. They eat. So, and I think that it's on purpose that these things are talked about in the Bible. And the story of no room at the inn, right? They needed shelter. They needed food, So I think we see these stories in the Bible. And the reason for that is we have to meet those basic needs in addition to preaching the gospel. And we do that through service, through generosity. And I think that's something that America, as such a powerful, we're bleeding a little bit. We're still a very powerful country. We have the means to help these people. Now, I think we first have to fix ourselves internally, get it so everyone in the country is doing good, doing well, and then we can start imparting. It's the principle of strengthen yourself and strengthen your brother. In America, we've got to get good, and then we can go in and the word colonization is demonized in America today. Because of the atrocities of the settlers in America, what they did to the Native Americans. So it's got to be peaceful and it's got to be voluntary. But what I know is, It's funny. I saw the new Avatar, and there's that tribe in the mountains, and the soldiers come and they give them guns, and they're like, "Whoa!" And it's like they're not trained with guns, but even without the training, they accepted and wanted the technology. And I know that's a fictional movie, but that's the same principle with these underdeveloped countries. They want the technology, and their culture will mesh with it. We're not going to ruin it. Okay, they're still going to have it, and even if they lose parts of it, their lives are better. I promise they want that. I guess I can't speak for them, but people want to have their needs met, to have plumbing, electricity, enough food and water. They want to have a place, have enough money so they can raise children. These are all things they want, even if they don't have them. And so I think it's our duty as the wealthy to impart of our substance to these people. And, not only, the teach a man to fish, give a man a fish, teach them to fish, but that also involves giving them stuff. You have to give them a fishing rod, right? And so there's giving and teaching, and that's going to take a lot of manpower and a lot of effort. But we've got a lot of retired folks who are bored a lot of the time. We've got a whole untapped labor force where they want to feel like they're doing something good. There's ways to get them involved, the older generation who want to help, who, well, maybe don't want to, but who are bored and need stuff to do. So anyway, I think that's something that can be done. And I think that's the solution, because if your country is good, the country you're familiar with, where your family is, you don't have to leave, right? You just stay there, and it's great. And I'm not saying that we should, be super tribalistic and nobody gets to go anywhere, but you just won't want to as much. And, people will move in and out of countries just freely. They'll just be, and obviously there needs to be less contention. There's a lot of adversarial countries that, we need to work through this, world peace. All I'm asking for is world peace. That's it. Nothing crazy. But that's how we get to that. Is there we can get rid of some of the jealousy. When you're not starving, you can kind of think a little more clearly, and you're like, okay, we actually, it's okay that we're different, a little bit different countries. We're pretty equal. I don't have to be jealous. I don't have to, invade the other country. We can just keep to ourselves and kind of live in a happy world. So if any of elected officials are listening, I just solved, I just told you the plan for world peace. And obviously there are people who are going to say, that's not how it works. But regardless, great. And then last thing I want to talk about is, I think that there are, actually, no, I don't. A lot of people will tell me that there are multiple paths to happiness, to joy. And I just I think that's kind of appeasing. You're appeasing people. And I think you're promoting mediocrity with that, which is not something I don't think we want to promote. And I'm not saying you have to be the best at everything, but I'm just saying don't settle for a sad life where you're alone and you're miserable and you need, drugs every day just to exist. Let's not settle for that, right? Let's not just say, oh, that's okay. We don't hate, no one hates you. It's not, you're not a bad person because of that. But let's push ourselves a little bit. Let's have a little bit of divine discontent and just want to improve just a little bit. The path to happiness is to have a loving spouse and family who you love and who loves you. It's those relationships. I talked about it last time. It's the relationships that lead to happiness, especially with first of all, with Jesus, with your spouse, and with your family and friends who are, like family. That's the path. And let's not try to settle for stuff less than that. Find a spouse. I mean, I don't know if I want to give tons of dating. Maybe I will give some dating advice, because I knocked it out of the park. I got really, really lucky, but also there was a lot of effort that went into it. I got my wife, I got her flowers a lot. Okay. It's nice. So anyway, and if you're really struggling to find someone, instead of looking outward and saying, oh, the dating pool sucks. Oh, I can't find my dating apps suck. Let's maybe just make a change in ourselves, because people find people. There is kind of a hypergamy issue where a lot of people are going after just a few, chosen, well, not chosen, but a few people who are kind of above the curve there. But improve yourself, I'll say I had a lot of struggles with dating earlier in my life. But I had some interesting prayers where I recognized, like, dude, you are not good enough yet. You aren't. And I have an advantage because I'm a little taller, but like I wasn't good enough. And I'm so happy that I made changes in my life that were hard and that I didn't always feel like I could do. But when I made the changes, I saw the results. And the results is finding true happiness with someone who you love. And, there were times where I thought it wouldn't happen, but it did. And it came as a result of me improving myself. One of my favorite um, official religious leaders who I really look up to, he talks a lot about being an agent or no, yeah, an agent or an object. Agents act, objects are acted upon. And so people who go out there and say, well, the dating pool sucks, I can't find anybody. That's being an object. You're saying, well, no one's reaching out to me. It's not working for me. Instead of being an agent saying, okay, I'm not good enough yet. I'm going to improve myself. And they say, be yourself. Okay, be yourself, but just be a little bit better than you were, but still be yourself, but be better. Right. And that's how you'll find success in that path. And sorry, I'm not trying to be unkind, but I think that having a spouse who you love and loves you brings you closer to Christ. And that's what I'm all for. And so I encourage everyone to search for that. And then once you're married, make it work. And I haven't married that long, so I'm not going to sound like some expert, but make it work, and you'll be happier. I've never met someone who's like, well, maybe there are people who are happier after the divorce, but maybe didn't do so hot. Anyway, that's kind of all I have for today on the show. A little bit of a shorter show today, but I think that's okay because there's not really anyone watching. Let's see. Sorry, it's way too close. Got this microphone. It's pretty great. Any people talking? Any chatters? Nope. Well, if there ever are any questions, then I'm sure I will be able to answer those. And I think that's everything we have for tonight. It's been great being with you, and I will be back on Monday, Martin Luther King Jr. Day. Next week, I'll be back. We'll do a similar show. We're going to talk we're going to cover protesting, kind of like the history of it, what it does, what the benefits, how I think people should be going about it because it is valuable, and a variety of other topics, whatever pops up, maybe Greenland. But anyway, we'll get into that at a future time. It's been great being with you. I will talk to you later.